And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Welcome to Against the Grain, where curiosity leads the way.
Scott, thanks so much for joining me. How you doing, mate?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. I've been thinking about it all week, and I've been mugging up this book of yours. I read it a year or so ago, maybe just a little longer. I can't remember, when was it released?
A year or so ago.
Yeah. So I got it pretty soon after you released it and went through it. My son, who's 35 now, he's been exposed to all this stuff since he was about 8. He's really enjoyed it. We both sort of read it together and bounced off each other. So I've got some questions lined up for you on some of the content in there.
Great.
But I thought I'd start with the Secrets in Plain Sight movie. I think that's where I first came to hear about you. And when I watched it, I used to be a Freemason. I worked in the legal profession, and I went up to senior warden in a Freemasons lodge. So I'm aware that, they use the terms on the square, and what is a square? It's the angle of 90 degrees or a fourth part of a circle. And they used all these sort of allegorical statements called God, the grand geometrician of the universe, and so on. And so when and it was subsequent to me coming into connection with the crop circles in 1997, when I gave all that life up and then found out what all that stuff was that had been going on in the lodge, about geometry and so on. And then that led up to me watching your film and thinking, wow, they've laid out Washington and London and the other places that you've covered now, using all of these ratios and proportions. And I thought, this guy's got to know about crop circles.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
And
I've been following crop circles since the 90s. Yeah.
And that was it. So when I heard you got inspired by crop circles, and then obviously, quite wisely sort of kept that back a little bit, because you knew what happens to people who step out and say, oh, I've got an interest in these things.
Well, my partner at Sacred Geometry Academy, Jeff Fitzpatrick, interviewed me around 2012 or so. Mm-hmm. Secrets in Plain Sight came out in 2010.
2010.
And so a couple of years later, he interviewed me, and he said he had a dying question to ask, and that was whether I'd heard of crop circles. And he couldn't believe that I hadn't included it in the Secrets in Plain Sight. But I told him then that I thought it was too loaded of a subject for people to handle, so I didn't talk about it. But ironically, it was the catalyst that started me on the path of creating that documentary film. And I had been drawing crop circles since like 99 on my computer. Okay. And I even made a crop circle coloring book in 2005. And I made greeting cards that were based on crop circles and all this digital art. And I felt like it really upgraded me in some way that was very difficult to articulate. And I don't think I really managed to do that until I wrote that book that you read a year ago, Sacred Geometry, Philosophy, and Worldview. It kind of took me about 20 plus years to understand what was happening with geometry. And I tried to crystallize that in a coherent philosophy so that people that read that book will be able to put their experiences in and understand them in this framework.
Yes.
And it's kind of the book I wish I had 25 years ago when I was starting out in this whole world of outside the box thinking and looking at things that are kind of in our cultural peripheral vision,
yeah,
where we can't quite perceive them.
Yeah.
And I've always been comfortable in that space.
Okay.
And I think most people aren't, right? Most people are like, oh, I don't like that. And I think UFOs kind of go in that same bucket. and crop circles and anything that we don't understand, like, and we can't map out with science. It's kind of like woo woo and let's crazy talk. I don't know. I have a tolerance for that, but I'm very rational. So I do like to figure it out and understand it.
But that's what the subject needs, I think. I think, I always, like yourself, I shied away from the UFOs as much as I could. Unfortunately, the conflation between, crop circles and UFOs, and I worked for Jaime Maussan as a correspondent for years. He's the UFO guy, and so, immediately as soon as you mention crop circles, people make that connection with UFOs and say, "Oh, you believe in aliens, do you?" or something like that, and make that leap. And I used to say to people, I'm actually more interested in phenomena B. How people respond to these types of phenomena, because that's sort of telling about culture and psychology and sociology and stuff. The way that people act in the way that they do when they're confronted with this stuff. But just somebody saying, somebody that they know or have known well, saying, oh, "I've got an interest in this," that it changes the dynamics. It's quite fiery. So I was always quite interested in that.
Me too. I think that's one of the most interesting things. Like if you look at the phenomenon of crop circles and you put the question of how they are made and who made them aside for the moment,
Yeah.
and you just look at the sociological phenomenon, I think it's a fascinating case where there's this phenomenon that's happening every year and people manage to completely ignore it almost 100%.
Absolutely.
And there's only a small handful of people that are drawn to it and keenly interested in it. But what is it that enables us to have such a massive blind spot where we don't even want to know about it? We've already decided without, like, I don't want to look at the evidence.
Right.
I've already decided that it's a bunch of
Yeah.
BS. And
Yeah.
don't bother me with aerial photographs of crop circles because that's crazy. and that's really interesting just from a psychological
It really is.
Yeah. It reminds me of like the apocryphal story. It's probably not true of the Native Americans looking at Columbus's ships and just not even seeing them.
Yes.
Not even being able to see them. And there's one guy in the tribe, the shaman, who's like, what is that? What do you see that? And everybody else is like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a really funny phenomenon. I read, there's a wonderful book by a woman, a British author called Margaret Heffernan, called Willful Blindness. And things like that, studies like that, academic studies, which show the lengths to which we can go to as human beings to block something out, or as you say, put it to the side and not paying attention. It's incredible.
Yeah, and it I think about in politics how there's certain, I don't need to go into politics, but there's certain characters in politics that are doing like overtly egregious things that are just totally wrong, and
Yes.
and most of the people are like, oh, that's totally fine, I don't even notice it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Like, is that who you want to have lead you? Like, that's not right.
Well, one of the things that the crop circle's done for me over the years is I coined this phrase, informing other activities. It was just something that came to me as I was noticing that these similar dynamics that we see, for example, with the way that people respond to crop circles, we see playing out in the world of politics or in other subjects where there are these blind spots that people won't go near or react in a certain unreasonable or illogical way.
I think it has to do, like, psychologically, we could talk about the shadow.
Yeah.
And how we all have a shadow, and it's the place that it's in the shadow because we refuse to look at it.
Yeah.
And the solution to the shadow problems is to actually look at them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And consciousness kind of cures it, in the sense that when you become aware of it, it takes away the power of it being hidden.
Yeah.
And then you have to process those emotions or process that, and then you're a better person for it.
Yeah.
So I think culturally, it's almost like the same thing as the psychology of an individual human being. It's at a massive scale, but we're able to see. I think maybe we're just outliers on the kind of normal distribution curve, where we are able to see a little bit more into the shadow than most people, or we're able to tolerate ambiguity
Yeah.
and not knowing the concrete answer to everything,
Yeah.
but being actually maybe attracted to mysteries, and not just being so frustrated that you don't know the answer.
Yeah.
But I think there's a beauty to something that is irreducibly a mystery, where it's like, I love it because
Yeah.
we can't pin it down. It's almost like the uncertainty principle in quantum physics, where we can't know the position and the momentum of a particle simultaneously, and we have to come to accept that wave particle duality as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. You use that analogy in your book, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it works so well because these are the things that we're talking about. And you're right. I mean, I worked on a documentary. One of the first documentaries I worked on with a Norwegian filmmaker, the guy who actually taught me filmmaking, was called Embrace the Mystery, Crop Circles. It's a 3-part film that we made. And we had long discussions about this title being really what we wanted to get across, that people maybe should take a view where there is no answers, and that you need to learn to be comfortable with that because it's actually very rewarding, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But all the while trying to find more information and not being comfortable with ignorance. There's a
Yes.
difference, you
Yeah.
see.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I'm very uncomfortable with ignorance, but I want to push the boundary of what I know forward as much as I can. But in that, I've come to accept that I can't know it all.
Right.
I think that's a hallmark of wisdom. Like Socrates would say, "Well, I don't know, I don't know."
Yeah.
And that's considered, and he was considered by the Oracle of Delphi to be the wisest person because he was able to say he doesn't know.
So true. So true.
And but that's very different from just an ignoramus who doesn't know because they haven't even tried
Right.
to learn
Completely.
anything.
Completely. Yeah. I'm glad you made that distinction. Most people would most people do have a difficulty when I say that geometry is related to philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. Most people, obviously are in the mathematics, the quantitative aspect of mathematics and geometry for measuring, how big your carpet's going to be and stuff like this. Making that connection, you've done it very well in your book. I studied language and communication at university, and so language and the School of Philosophy all goes together. So I understand a bit about language, but I loved your phrase, language is the map, not the territory. Can you for those that are watching that are not familiar with this sort of connection and these terms, can you make a connection for me?
Sure. I think in the book I used the example of an apple. So when you're a child, your parent or caregiver holds up this fruit and says apple if they're speaking English. But they say a different word, maybe manzana, if you're speaking Spanish. And you can imagine there are many different words for this fruit. And we all know that. But the language is a pointer to what's in consciousness. It doesn't contain meaning in itself. You see, it's just a way that we've formed the sound waves with our mouth that forms this word apple or manzana or what have you. But at no point does that actually represent that apple. It's only that association that you have to make in consciousness. So that's the territory is consciousness.
Right.
The language is just a map of that. Just like a sailor would need a map of the coastline, the map is a representation of the real coastline that's out there.
Yes.
And we don't make that mistake. If the map is wrong, we're going to run into the rocks. And we're well aware of the reality of the territory, the reality of those rocks. But we somehow become less connected with that when we get kind of lost in our heads with language and we think the words that they said hurt you, perhaps.
Yeah.
Did they? Those are just words they said. Words are just They can't actually hurt you. It's you've allowed yourself to hurt yourself, or I don't know, but those words are on a different level. They're just a map. And in the book, I talk more about the universal language of mathematics,
Right.
and how it is the only universal language that we have, because every culture in history has had some form of mathematics. It all ends up being the same mathematics. And within mathematics, there are different like logical like labels that we may put on certain kinds of math, but we understand very deeply that math is all interconnected. And there's this project in modern math called the Langlands project, which is trying to connect what we think of as disparate islands of math. And they're having success in a lot of ways of connecting these islands.
Oh, interesting.
Just like islands are, they seem so separate, but we forget that they're connected under the water, aren't they? They're actually all part of the same edifice or planet. And that's how math is, I think. And therefore, math is something that we don't, I believe it's something that we discover rather than invent. So it's not just a product of human ingenuity. It is partly, and there are a lot of brilliant people that come up with these things. But I think that they're like explorers, and they're discovering these new islands and these new territories. And then people that come later understand perhaps how those are connected to what we already know.
Right.
But the math that forms the foundation of the universe and gives us, it's the reason that math works at all in quantum physics and in science in general, is that the universe is built out of this math.
Right.
But math, we have to remember, is a map. It is just a map. It is not the territory. The territory is consciousness.
Yes.
And it's the same with human language. It's always consciousness in the end.
Right.
There's nothing out there. When we look at math, we just fundamentally understand it's a series of relationships, complex relationships. Is all it's pointing. It's always just pointing to something. Like the number 3 points to this idea of threeness that we understand fundamentally in consciousness.
Yeah.
But there's no 3 there. There's nothing outside of consciousness that is 3. It's a fundamental aspect of consciousness. In fact, that's the cover of the book, is a kind of impossible triangle, because I've discovered that the way that the human mind works has this tripartite nature, and I think that's why we have so many 3s in mythology and in governments and so on. It's because we're actually mirroring our own minds in these stories and in these structures that are meant to govern us.
I think of Michael Jackson's ABCs, easy as 1, 2, 3. The fact that it feels right. If we said, if you said to a child, have you learnt your ABs, or have you learnt your ABCDs? It speaks to that feeling, doesn't it? That thing that we can't put our fingers on, that in consciousness. No, it's got to be in 3s. It's got to be da-da-da.
And usually we work on that level of feeling, that qualitative level. And it's rare when we are able to go to the quantitative and actually kind of understand it in a more analytical left brain way. Mm-hmm. But those are 2 of the legs of this tripod. There's the qualitative and the quantitative, and there's also the mathematical. Right. And so they're all different aspects of the same whole. You can look at that in any way you want. But
for those people that are frightened, I mean, that's one of the other things I've encountered over the years. As soon as you mention math, everybody seems to have had a number done to them at school, where it seems to have switched off any interest, or it's brought about a fear, including myself, really. I mean, when it first, oh my God, I've got to work through this stuff and that. I've always considered myself number dyslexic, when it comes to but you struggle through and you get through. And I always remember being told that pi was just something we had to know and just not ask questions about. It was just it's 22/7 or it's 3.14. Don't ask me why. It just is. Okay, so just put it in there. And that lack of an explanation that we somehow through our interest in the crop circles have come up. And
well, it's interesting you bring that up, because pi is one of those mysteries that is fundamentally a mystery, and some of the smartest mathematicians will say, well, at the end of the day, we know a whole lot about pi and all of the approximations and the algorithms to get there, and we still don't really understand it. It transcends our understanding because it's a transcendental number that never repeats and has no algebraic solution, and yet we'll just call it pi. I think that's the best thing we can do at the end of the day. No matter what level of understanding you have about this, is you have to symbolize it with, I mean, what could be more elegant than just symbolizing this mystery with a single letter?
Yeah.
Pi. And we have the same problems with like E, Euler's number, which is also transcendental.
Yeah.
We have, and also the physicists will say, well, we don't really know what light is in the end. We definitely don't understand gravity, which is the crux of the problem between the physics of the very large and the very small.
Yes.
But we're just going to call it something, label it, because we have to get on with the business of living our lives, and we can never solve it. And I think in a way, that is a design. It's like good design. I think it is part of the feature of the universe to have things that you can't fully solve.
Yeah.
If it was completely solvable, it would be very boring, and a computer would understand it. And thankfully, that is not the case. There is mystery. There is the unknowable aspect of the universe, which is like, what is consciousness? It seems to be the big question in a lot of areas, and no one really knows except for their own experience.
Right.
That's all you can know. And I think we just have to say, well, I don't know some things, and be wise about it, and leave it at that.
So the pursuit of mathematics, or if you get to grips with pi or Euler's equation, you necessarily come to a place where you have to accept that there is a mystery you're never going to solve, be comfortable with that, and then just carry on to get into that place where you're not ignorant. You're in awe of the mystery, and but you've accepted this is a mystery without end.
Yeah, but also to be fascinated by all the aspects of that mystery.
Right.
I think that's where they add levels of appreciation. They add fullness to my life when I realize these connections, like say about pi or whatever.
Give me an example. Give me an example of a connection in pi that you've come across.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of the approximations to pi are really interesting. The fractions, and how in history some people have gotten closer, and yet none of them is exactly pi.
Right.
But like the Chinese had a really good approximation. I think it was, I can't remember the fraction, but I think it was over, like in the 300s, over something over 113.
Yeah, I think
like
that's
that.
John Neal. That presentation I sent you some years ago that I filmed with John Neal, he talks about the Chinese system, and that, I think, at the end of that film.
Yeah, they had a really impressive fraction for pi that was way more accurate than like 22/7, which is okay.
Yeah.
But like all of these things are very esoteric, because like 22/7 works fine if for like building a house or something, that'll work.
Yeah.
But like And it's similar. The quest for pi is similar to squaring the circle,
Right.
which we know is impossible mathematically. You can't ever get the circumference of a circle to exactly equal the perimeter of a square, but you can just choose an arbitrary level of precision now with computers. I can have AutoCAD, do it to eight figures after the decimal point if I want.
Yeah.
But I can never get it exactly because of the elusive quality of pi. You can never really pin it down and fully rationalize it. And I think that's the point.
That is the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always, so it's two things with the diameter of the circle, one side of a square. When I sort of, and I'm not sure when I kind of swallowed this pill and thought, okay, that's one side of the square, so that's a finite line, and then you've got this infinite, never-ending circumference. So we're talking about a relationship within pi of the finite to the infinite.
You could think of it that way. Yeah, I think so. It's a nice way of reconciling the infinite with the finite. Like, the circle represents the sacred space or the dome or the heavens.
Yes.
Or that's which is above, and the square represents the terrestrial, the mundane, the measurable, the known, the buildable, the rational,
Yes.
all of that. And so I think it gets to the essence of what it means to be a human, is to try to reconcile these things in some way, because we have them within ourselves. We have this soul. That, I mean, a lot of people don't even believe they have a soul. It's fascinating. But we have this inspired aspect of our existence which can create things out of nothing. We have this ability to intuit things, to know things without going through a series of logical steps. We can suddenly know, aha, eureka, and make a breakthrough in science, or make a new neural connection somehow. And I think that kind of is more like circular. It's more like the unknowable mystery of how did that happen? I don't know, but I'm glad it did. And then we also have the plodding, linear, one step at a time, building one brick at a time methodology that makes things repeatable and scientific, essentially, if they can be an experiment that can be repeated by following this algorithm of steps. But it's fascinating that the breakthroughs in science don't seem to come from that method.
No.
They don't come from following one step after another. They come from an insight, a realization, a sudden connection that you didn't have before, a new way of looking at it, and looking into your shadow and realizing something. That kind of thing happens, and it's all about consciousness. It's all about consciousness, about you becoming aware of something that you weren't aware of a moment before, right?
So,
and that's what makes the breakthrough.
So are consciousness and the soul the same thing?
No, I would say the soul is like an individual. Like, you have a body, right?
Yeah.
It's very individual.
Yeah.
Your soul is like that too.
Okay.
But maybe your soul, like, I kind of buy into the whole idea of reincarnation.
Right.
And how your soul continues on through many lifetimes. But it's still an individual. And ultimately, in the fullness of time, that will also pass away.
Really? Okay. So I've had I've struggled intellectually with reincarnation, particularly with the crop circle of crooked soli, which talks about the mitochondrial DNA and the discovery that mitochondrial DNA, for myself, the discovery that mitochondrial DNA theoretically goes back to the primordial Eve. And therefore
Right.
the DNA, the mitochondrial DNA passes through this matriarchal line. And therefore any feelings of reincarnation could be instigated by every single cell of your body that contains this DNA, because you're echoing what's come before you inside you. And then
Yeah,
when I
like
thought, go on.
that reminds me of ontology recapitulates phylogeny. Have you heard that
No,
phrase?
no.
It's the idea in developmental biology that an embryo goes through all of these changes
Ah,
that
yes.
kind of mirror the evolution of life.
The
Like
phylogenetic
we,
scale. Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
yeah, like we have like gill slits at some point when we're very primitive, and then we have a two-chambered heart like a fish, and then we end up with a three-chambered heart like an amphibian, and then we have a four-chambered heart, and then the things that make us Homo sapiens are added like at the last minute.
Yeah.
And but that whole developmental process in utero mirrors the long millions and millions of years of evolution.
Yeah. And I remember my psychology lecturer actually talking to me about the phylogenetic scale, in terms of the further up the phylogenetic scale we are towards Homo sapien, the more we're reliant on our parents to, raise us, and we spend longer with our parents, we spend longer in education, whereas, the ants and so on are just immediately born and they're off, and they're sort of almost automatons.
Yeah, or like a deer drops out of its mother when it's born and like gets up and walks.
Straight away. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting sort of switch on its head, isn't it? The further we've got to develop this complex language that can abstract and ask questions about why we're here and what it's all about, the more we need care and development from our parents and so on.
Exactly, and then our culture is accelerating at an even faster level than that. Like within a human lifetime, our culture is like unrecognizable from like the time when we were born.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like it's going so fast. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Like, it's like there's turbocharged,
Yeah. Yeah.
change. It's too much,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And so again, looking at consciousness. So I like your distinction that soul is like the body, that we get this individual thing. The other thing with reincarnation is, I thought, okay, I remember one of my big teachers, the guy that took me to the crop circle, said, you get one life and it lasts forever. He made this kind of play, right, on it could be reincarnation, but coming back here might not be it. It might be infinite number of places that we go on to continue our journey as a soul. But I always thought that soul was the infinite part, the part of us that related to this analogy with the side of the diameter of a circle and the circle itself, that we had a finite life that contributed to our infinite soul, and as it went through on its journey through the infinite domain of consciousness.
Well, I think that there's only consciousness in the end. This whole universe exists in consciousness is my thesis in my book. But I would say the soul is a structure within consciousness that has a longer lifespan than your individual body. Okay.
Yeah.
But our planet Earth also has a lifespan, and the sun is going to explode in however many billion years, and everything seems to have its time. And I think that the soul may have many incarnations, but it probably has a time. But
would that be the enlightenment or the samadhi of the soul's journey, rejoining consciousness because it's become enlightened or one with the?
Well, I think enlightenment is it's not a switch. It's like this spectrum that goes on for many lifetimes. And it's just becoming more aware of the levels of illusion. Ultimately, there's only consciousness, and yet there's all these nested Russian dolls within that, and each one of those dolls says, "I am, I am this person. I am this cell. I am this solar system. I am this thing." But really, I am is just a relationship that you have with what's above and what's below.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a temporary relationship, but it's a very important one to experience. And I think that all of those I ams contribute to the fullness of of all that is. But ultimately it's all consciousness, experiencing. It's all just a great experience, all of this. It's not about stuff. Even the stuff of our world is actually the outside of an inner experience that we're viewing from outside of that boundary. We're viewing the world mind's imagination of creating the universe. All the atoms are a work of imagination. Imagine a computer that had infinite processing capacity and infinite memory, and it has so much capacity that it's able to imagine every atom and every interaction. And that's what you're looking at when you're looking at world mind, and it's staggering just the level of capacity that it has. I mean, and we just get this tiny little glimpse of that through our incredible limited human senses. But
the quaternity, I've always, and since I learned it, the quaternity, as Jung would put it, the thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. So leading those, we've got these limited senses, but once they're kind of working and we're using them, the intuition part of it is this connection, isn't it? Is the aha moments that you're talking about? Where we can make these connections that are not logical; they just come from somewhere.
Yeah, and our ego is usually all too willing to claim credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if we're really honest with ourselves, we don't even know where we got the idea from.
Well, that's why I like Elizabeth Gilbert. When she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, she gave a TED talk and she talks about the muse and says, she says, I'm never going to take any scientists along with me here when I talk about the muse. But anecdotally, when you talk to lots and lots of artists, they all talk about their own muse. Musicians, they've got to stop the car because the tunes come into their head and they've got to write it down because they know it's that dream quality where you can easily forget because it's other and so on. And so she makes this assertion, which I agree with, that it's really, even if it's not true, it's really healthy for the ego to just offset this wonderful idea that you got and not say it's mine, not come from me.
Well, and if all is consciousness, and if you and I are aspects of consciousness, why couldn't there be beings that we can't touch and measure and weigh that might exist in some other realm? Maybe they're souls or spirits or hyperdimensional beings or angels or however you want to say it, that could act as that muse, that could whisper that in your ear and give you that inspiration at the moment when you're open to it. Why can't that be the case?
Well, exactly.
I don't see a fundamental problem with that. But if you are a materialist and you believe that everything is physical and this is the only life you have to live, and any talk of like soul or even intuition is just like whatever makes you happy, that's fine, but that's a bunch of BS, really.
Yeah.
And so that seems to be, sadly, the dominant paradigm under which we all live, is this very materialistic notion of reality, even though for 100 years or more now, we've known that isn't really true because of quantum physics.
Yeah.
But our culture lags behind in that regard, and like understanding the nature of reality is still like this Newtonian physical thing for most of our underlying assumptions in our culture, I think. But there's hope because the forefront of thinkers 100 years ago has already shown with the double slit experiment, revisited, like with the Copenhagen interpretation, for example, that consciousness is part of reality, and that we can't get away from it. It underlies all things, and it seems like the early pioneers of quantum physics understood this very well. And now in the last 100 years, we seem to have a lot of people who don't want to talk about that, move along. Let's not go there, because it's just, we can't do science that way. And they seem to be missing the point
Yeah.
in my view.
Yeah. I agree with you. Have you heard of the film called Being in the World? It's by a philosopher called Hubert Dreyfus.
No.
It's my favorite philosophical documentary. Check it out. I think you can find it on YouTube for free now. He goes through a bunch of music. He goes through a Japanese carpenter, because dogo, the word dogo means the way of the tool. And so it's all about, his philosophy is, it's all about connecting with objects in the world. Is it gives you that feedback to experience the body, and therefore that feedback gets you to experience consciousness. And so the Japanese carpenter that's using his whole body to plane a piece of wood and putting all of himself into this tool, the way of the tool is the translation for the word, gives him the feedback, just the same as the guitarist who's working with the instrument, or the martial artist who's working with a stick can get to feel the feedback of his body and the consciousness working in the body, and these layers of it. I think that's been my pursuit through the martial arts, is this internal stuff where you're really trying to get to what chi is, which really is consciousness. It's this, the more you tend to know yourself, the more the chi activates. That's where the path leads. And so he makes this distinction about consciousness and objects in the world being there for us to experience consciousness. That's really the nutshell of it.
And I can think of two different things that reinforce what you're saying. One is in the Bhagavad Gita, where I think Arjuna is like, why I don't want to go in this battle. Like I see that those people are my kin, and
Yes.
the enemy is my kin as well. And why would I kill them? And it's like, no, that's what you've got to do. That's the whole drama of life, is to go do your duty and all that, and use the body and all that.
Yeah.
And I also would say that in my practice of sacred geometry, the best way to get into this is to draw it with traditional instruments, with the compass and the straight edge and paper and a pencil, and because you have to like use your eyesight and lean over the page and use your hands, and it involves much more of you than drawing it on a computer. But drawing it on a computer is also something that I do and I enjoy, but it's much more abstract. There's certain advantages to it, but as a means of transformation, I have to say that the traditional way of doing it is far superior, because it involves you. It encompasses your body as well in the whole experience, not just your perception, but it something about involving your body in it makes it, I don't know, much more intuitive. It hits deeper.
Right.
You know.
There used to be that slogan. I think it was for a company. It was an advertising slogan or something. He used to say, "Tell me and I will hear. Show me and I'll see. Involve me and I will understand." And I always think of that with regards to sacred geometry.
It's really well said.
Yeah.
It's
and
so
it's that involvement.
You have to learn by doing it. You have to be involved in making it. It's like a Lego set. You can see the pictures of what the final Lego set looks like on the box, but that doesn't give you the joy. The joy is in putting those things together and using your body and searching through the whole pile of chaos to find the piece that you want. And there's something just about that, which I think that you're just getting with the picture of what it means to be a human in a human body.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the whole point of it, is do that and you'll get what we've kind of set up for you to experience.
Yeah,
the further away from that you get, like if you upload your consciousness into a computer and you become code, like there's a Grimes song that's like this. It's really cool. I think you get so far away from the whole point of transformation. And Rudolf Steiner had this whole thing about Lucifer and Ahriman, and he chose these two
Right.
different demons, like one from Christianity, one from Zoroastrianism, to represent these different polarities that pull on us. Ahriman is the physicalized version. Like putting everything in a computer would be physicalizing consciousness into some kind of physical, mechanical process that we can understand and linearize it. It's kind of like the square. Whereas Lucifer, another demon from the Christian tradition, would be the one that wants to make everything part of your soul and spirit and invisible. And it's that inspiration. It's all of that side of you, the circle side.
Yeah.
But I think Steiner had the wisdom to see that those are both demons, actually. And the way through is the third way, which is to integrate them both together. Yeah.
Three again. That's where
he called that the Christ consciousness. But that he lived quite a long time ago, and it makes sense that he was more religious than we tend to be today. But anyway, I love that whole Trinity philosophy that he had about that. And I see it playing out in the world a lot with AI is very Ahrimanic.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I think that if we use that kind of Luciferic side of being inspired with our own natural inspiration, and then using that to prompt AI,
Right.
then we could get something really cool out of it. But if we just go down the Ahrimanic road, we won't have our own thoughts anymore, and we'll become like drones in a way.
Right.
But so it's necessary for us to steer that, I think, using our own intuition and our own like circle aspects that
Yes.
we have control of.
Yes.
And I think that as human beings, we are the geometers or the architects that can square the circle, where we can bring these aspects of our psyche together in a unique way, because we do have free will, and we do have the ability to build these incredible machines that can exercise that will for us.
Yes.
That we're unique in all the animals, and that we can make tools, we can go to the moon, we can make an iPhone. Yeah, allegedly. It's so funny how everything these days is questioned.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Like, is the Earth round? Did we go to the moon?
I know.
Basically, anything the government says is like, as soon as they say it, there's a group of people who will say it's the opposite.
Well, even the gender debate, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's on steroids, really. He's a man, he's a woman. That whole thing's up for debate now and questioning, isn't it? And
yeah. I mean, it's good to question your assumptions.
Sure.
But
I always like Jean-Luc Picard's phrase. He said, I have to be ready at any given moment to reconsider my convictions.
Yeah, I like that. But it also kind of paralyzes you.
Yeah.
And you have to take time out of whatever mission you're on to like re-examine your worldview. It's like in a Star Wars film, someone in a bar said, "Do you want to buy some death sticks?" And Obi-Wan says, "No, I don't want to buy any death sticks." And you go home now and rethink your entire life. and he used the Force on him.
You Jedi mind tricked him.
Yeah.
He's going to go home now and sit there and contemplate everything and go mad. Yeah.
Like, what am I doing? Trying to sell death sticks.
I like that. I don't remember that from the film. I have to remember that now. What was the other thing I wanted to say to you about? So what we've just been describing, to bring that back to a geometric thing, we're talking about Temet Noske. We're talking about know thyself, aren't we? And for me, and I don't know if you could confirm or elaborate on this for me, but the circle becoming the vesica is this reflection, is this consciousness or this creation of something to reflect upon itself, to know itself by looking in the mirror. And it's by the creation of the Vesica Pisces that you can then get the threeness, the triangle coming out of the Vesica in the middle. Have you ever thought of it in those terms? Is that the right way to think about it? I've never been sure. It's just something that I came up with along the way, thinking, well, I don't know if I came up with it. I might have even read it somewhere, but it just seems to have stuck. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great thought exercise to go through this creation of a universe. Matt, let's just do it. It'll just take a minute.
Yeah.
So let's say you're this infinite being with unlimited capacity, and you're in a void. And you're like, what should I do? I think I'll build a universe, And how will I do that? Well, I'm going to have to imagine space and time. And if I imagine space, how do I enter that? Well, there's going to be an origin point. There's going to be a point somewhere that you choose as the locus of your awareness for that time. And you're going to say, okay, here I am at this point, and I'll call it the singularity. And from that singularity, I'm going to have an expansion out to some radius in this given unit of time. And that I'll call my first boundary. And that will be a circle. Actually, it's a hyperdimensional sphere. But we can see it and understand it as human beings best as a two-dimensional circle.
Sure.
And, okay, so I've got this circle. Now what? Where's the most interesting place in the universe? Well, it's either at the singularity, but I've already been there. I know that. It's got to be somewhere on the circumference of the circle. And which point? Well, I don't know. This is the one move where it's arbitrary. I don't know which point of the circle to choose. And this is like the most difficult decision. But eventually you have to choose a point to move your locus to, let's say. And then what are you going to do once you're there? Well, let's have another big bang, let's have another expansion. And how far should we go? Well, why don't we just go that same amount? So I don't want to be arbitrary. I just want to go that same amount, the radius value. So I'll make another circle. And this is called the Vesica Pisces or Vesica Piscis. And out of that, now we have two really interesting points. It's where those circles intersect each other.
Yeah.
And so those are naturally the places where you'd go next. And now we have a polar choice. Should we go to the one on the left or the one on the right? And that seems to be where we're stuck a lot in politics.
Yeah.
Because we don't see the whole. We just see the one or the other. So that's duality. And you have to pick one, and then you make another circle. Then you can go to the previous, the left. If you pick the right, then you can go to the left, draw a circle there, or vice versa. And then you end up with all these other intersection points. So you're way past duality then. And then you can just keep going, and you end up with the flower of life, and you end up with this space-filling hexagonal grid, which is the basis of all structure. You end up just out of the Vesica originally. You have like the explosion of all the polygons. You have all these irrational numbers come out of it. The golden ratio comes out of it. Basically, all of mathematics comes out of these first few moves.
Yeah.
And all of mathematics seems so interconnected, and there's no part of it that seemed like an afterthought. It's all like fundamentally
it's there,
part of the same thought.
Yeah.
And so you must have invented all of mathematics in that moment of the singularity, really. And then the rest of it is just watching it unfold in time, and just seeing this beauty like expand and complexify and so on. And I think that understanding consciousness is also similar to this, in that we have boundaries. Like you could draw a circle around you and say, this is me, and everything inside that is me.
Yeah.
and everything outside of that circle is not me. And I'm 2 years old. I'm at the terrible twos, and now I have an ego because I can now say I am,
Yeah.
and I can now say that's mine.
Yeah.
And so that's just an early stage of these drawing these boundaries.
Yeah.
And as we age, we get more and more and more circles, and we have a greater and greater complexity that we're able to tolerate. And we can take on more and more perspectives, and we can start to see things through other people's eyes,
Mm-hmm.
because we can simulate that,
Mm-hmm.
and we can start to take the first, second, third, fourth, fifth person perspective on everything, and we can it just gets deeper and more refined the farther and farther we go. And I think that's actually a never-ending process. It's probably organized into octaves, like music.
Yeah, sure.
Music is also geometry. It's just a form of geometry that takes place in time.
In time. Yeah, the quadrivium, number, space, number, geometry, music, and astronomy, these 4 levels, so that we get that music and number in time. It's
Yeah. But you see how everything comes down to geometry in the end?
yeah.
Like that's the fundamental way that we can understand it universally.
Well, it's like children's building blocks, really, to represent this metaphysical, abstract concept of number. I mean, Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's protege, said that number is the primary archetype. And that's a great way of thinking about it as well, I think, number, isn't it? Is it getting to try and get to this qualitative aspect of number, to ignite the mystery of what number really is, rather than just this symbol, abstract symbol we've created to represent 2 or 3, and to talk about and start to get your head into 3. And it's like you said earlier, it takes time, doesn't it, to sink in?
Yeah, it does. It's a process, never-ending process. It's not just a switch. I think
No.
that's a foolish or newbie error, is thinking that enlightenment will just be this switch. Now I'm golden. Everything's great now.
But it represents that figures for the society, doesn't it? The culture. We want immediate gratification. We get fast food, right? We can get all this really quickly. So surely we can buy enlightenment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are switches, there are thresholds that you do pass on your journey, but there's no indication that's the last thing the last threshold you'll ever pass. And the way it goes, it seems like there's just a never-ending series of steps.
Yeah.
That one will go on, and you get a better and better view.
Mm.
You get more and more perspectives to understand everything with. And I think what it leads to in the end is greater and greater appreciation and acceptance.
Would you say that, I mean, it was the case for me, but would you say that in your experience, as you developed over those 20 years, you've already sort of said it comes in clicks. There are a few clicks where you go, okay, I get that. But it's just, you don't really realize, do you, that as you're going along, what it's doing to you. And so I used to think of that in terms of this universal constant of compression and expansion, like the breath, is that, we're expanding while we're out there sort of gathering data and gathering knowledge and doing our drawings and figuring stuff out and having conversations. And then there's a massive compression, a contraction at one particular moment when you go, aha, okay. And then it expands out and we go into the next stage of learning. And this happens infinitely.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like there's this mess of creation that you go through, and you have like notes all over the desk, and you have like this chaos, this creative time when it's, you don't really know what's happening, but you're pulling things together. And then there's usually this moment of like, aha, like, oh my God, I did it. I accomplished this thing. A compression, a crystallization.
Yes.
A a switch has been
switch.
flipped, or
Yeah.
you're on a new level. Welcome to the new level.
Yeah, you're starting all over again.
Level up, and choose your new attributes. Okay, I'm going to improve my agility here, and I'm going to it's like a game.
Yeah.
And you're like, cool, I've got this new capacity that I never had before. And now I look at my past life and I understand why I did those things, or why those other people did those things that were hurtful to me.
Yes.
Or whatever. You're like, oh, okay, I get that. And you have this level of acceptance. And then you may linger there, and then you probably eventually will continue on your next project and your next expansion, because that's what we do, right? We're like, okay, cool, I got that. Now what am I going to do? I'm bored. I want to go out and do something else now. I'm in search of adventure. And so but now you have more tools on your tool belt. You have more capacities. You have more. Yeah. You have a cooler mission you can go on with more fearsome beasts. And then you do this. You repeat. I think it's kind of like in the flower of life pattern, where you go around and you have all these circles in a ring, and then then there's this moment of like symmetry. You're like, oh, beautiful. And that's like that moment of compression that you're saying. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, sign me up. I'm going to go out on another tour. And you go all the way around again. And the journey's longer, and the challenges are harder. But then you're looking for that moment of symmetry and clarity and peace again. And it's almost like a helix, where you come around above where you were before, but now you're higher and you're bigger.
Which is an octave, isn't it? Same, but different.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, I'm up. There's something familiar about where I am now as where I was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm older, I'm wiser, and I also have aches and pains.
Yeah. Don't I know that one? Goodness me. Yeah, absolutely. That is the way, isn't it? This spiral that we're sort of constantly ascending, and that brings it in, doesn't it? That brings in this infinite journey where you're just growing, and you're and the nature of things is that you're going to go around and you're going to arrive back at the same place, and it's going to feel the same in a qualitative way, but it's also going to feel different.
And then imagine that you die and your body goes back into the world mind and dissolves and becomes something else and gets recycled. But your soul persists, and you're just standing there going, well, what am I going to do now? Well, you have this moment of reflection on what has come before, and you're like, well, sign me up. I want to do another journey. That was tough, but then you get incarnated again, maybe on Zeta Reticuli or God knows what.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I'm going to have this cool experience, but now you have new remembered capacities. And you don't probably have to forget, in order to live your new life, you can't be burdened with the past so much. So you have to drink from that river of Leth, or that the river of forgetting that the Greeks talked about. Yeah. You have to drink from that, so you're not burdened with your past life, but you still will have these kind of ancestral memories or something, where you're just, the kid was born and the kid's a musician. Like, I don't understand it, but the kid knows how to play, Right. And or the kid just knows math. Like, I don't understand why he's so good at that.
Yeah.
Or the kid is just so good socially. Like, oh my God, she just knows everybody's cousin's brother. Like, it's just crazy how this person is so good that way. And you retain a lot of those skills that you had before. And it's funny that we build these video games which are exactly like what I'm describing. Like, you died, but you still have your skills, right? And you lost all your stuff, but you've got to. It's easier to get your stuff now because you know the game, and you can get it, and you have better skills, so it's easy to go further. And I think that we unconsciously recapitulate the experience that we're having in our little plays within a play, in our little games that we make. And I've always been fascinated with video games in world building in general, and I taught Unity and C# programming for a time,
Right.
because I was really interested in what it's like to build a universe, to build a world, to build the physics, to build the rules.
Okay.
And I think it's just a natural instinct that we have as creators to repeat that in
Play
some
out. Yeah.
little way, you know.
But it's that microcosm thing then, isn't it? We're just, we're just sort of one little part of the fractal that's just repeating or iterating
Yeah,
the
and so
same
it's
process.
natural that we would, like, we don't know that we're gods, but we end up making little universes out of our Lego,
Yeah.
and then later out of computer games or out of code or out of whatever we have at hand, we're going to kind of redo and make our little doll's house.
Very interesting.
I think it's just a natural instinct, because if you do buy into this concept that all is consciousness, then who do you suppose the creator of the universe is? It's consciousness. And that's no different than your consciousness. It's consciousness with a larger boundary that has a greater scope of action. Like, you can imagine that one of the cells in your big toe is conscious.
Okay.
And it has a limited scope of its neighboring cells and the bloodstream and the nervous system and whatever is connected to it, its environment. And it thinks, this is cool. This is my neighborhood. These are my friends. Those are my enemies. Sometimes some bad guy comes in here and we have to get the white blood cells out to, like, kill them. And you ask that big toe cell, are you part of this body, a human? And it's like, you're crazy. No. What are you talking about? I've never seen that. And so, like, as a human being, you have a different scope. You're like, I'm responsible at this level. But I think that there's other levels, like the sun is probably conscious.
Yeah.
Everything is conscious. But when I say that, it's difficult with our language. Okay, so it has cognition. And its environment would include the planets, other suns, the galaxy, the solar wind. I don't know what's on its agenda, but it has different, bigger issues at hand, right? Than our scope,
Right.
As humans. It has a complex magnetic field, which, it's obviously thinking its thoughts, doing its thing.
That's where the scientists. I remember when I was at university, the landlord was a biochemist who'd also done psychology and finished his career lecturing in psychology, and was writing a book on what he considered to be the biological basis for consciousness. There is no psychic. I don't do woo-woo. These were his phrases. He actually, excuse me, he actually did me a lot of good, because he made me really refine and have to work on, my thought processes and the way I was putting things, making connections, do you know what I mean? And making leaps for the Hintergedanken, as Nietzsche would say. I'm just making these leaps, and he wouldn't bring me back. But he would say, no brain, no consciousness. That's
Right.
That's how they look at it, obviously. And I would come up with all of this geometry and the anthropic principle and all of these kinds of things to sort of say that there's something else going on.
Well, I've read Rupert Sheldrake has talked about the sun possibly being conscious in a kind of panpsychism.
Yeah.
And he points to the incredible complexity of the magnetic field of the sun is on par with the complexity of our human brains.
Right. That's
And
interesting.
so it could have the requisite complexity that we recognize as being correlated with consciousness. It could be happening in a different way with plasmas and with
Sure.
the bulk movement of electrons,
Sure.
through the sun.
Sure.
It's possible, but it would be a different order or different physical process
Right.
that would host that.
Right.
And so it would be easy for us to dismiss that, just as it would be easy for the big toe cell to say, like, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
I'm part of this body? That's
Yeah.
ridiculous, you know?
I,
And
I remember
yeah,
one of the early things for me to contemplate whether consciousness existed in something which you wouldn't consider it to exist in was psychedelic plants. And so, in my early experience with the crop circles, I worked with the guy that took me to the crop circles, was Native American, connected to Native American church with peyote. And so that's when I first experienced psychedelics. And he framed the whole thing up to me as they did, that these were entities that had different ways of communicating and interacting with you, right? It wasn't just the physical chemicals that you put in your body and this like psilocybin's doing this and changing your brain neurotransmitters and so on, all those kinds of science ways of explaining why you're having the experience. Just before I left living in Mexico, I had a shaman come to my house, and me and a girlfriend did ayahuasca. And I have to say that, over the years, I've experienced 3 different psychedelic plants: the mushrooms and the peyote and the ayahuasca. There is this definite feeling. I use the way that Jung used to talk about the I Ching and said, after a while of working with it, you feel like you're being guided by this wise. Do you know what I mean? And with all my interactions
like
with
a consciousness, a being,
exactly,
Yeah.
and that then made me relate to what's creating the crop circles in a very similar way, because there's this consciousness that was kind of guiding me in so many ways, where you look back, you go, there's no way that's just too coincidental. The coincidences are off the charts, and to put me there
Yeah.
at that particular time and so on. And the plant consciousness, I suppose, just like Elizabeth Gilbert says, really, even if you don't bring the scientists along with you, it's very healthy to relate to these plants in that way, that there's a consciousness there.
Yeah. Well, like, it reminds me of, you're speaking of psychedelics, like Terence McKenna, who was a kind of psychonaut.
Sure, philosopher.
He died, I think, in the early 2000s. But he wrote some really interesting books, and one of them, he like did DMT, and he got to this like deep level of reality where he's talking with these elves in
Machine
hyperspace.
elves, yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, and they see him, and they're like, "Oh, you're just a human, Like, what are you doing here?" And they're like, "We're like operating the machinery that runs the universe. Leave us alone. We're busy." And he just like had this conversation with these elves, and then he like is ripped back into his body after this DMT high.
So recent studies with DMT, now they're doing proper scientific studies with them, okay? Because the thing with DMT is it shoots you to the stars and you're not there very long and you come back quite quickly. But they're now keeping people under for an hour intravenously. And
wow.
and people in different places around the world are all coming back and describing the same reality with the machine elves.
So that therefore it wouldn't be a hallucination that was just idiosyncratic to your own
exactly
like crazy mind.
Exactly.
But it's actually a landscape that's real, that's out there.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
Sure is. And so I think that ancient cultures, like the ancient Egyptians, for example, may have been doing hallucinogens such as
the blue lily,
kykeon, and blue lily, and the ancient Greeks had this Eleusinian mysteries where they scholars now believe that they were doing hallucinogens.
Yeah,
and they were in communion with intelligences. Okay, that they called the gods.
Yeah, exactly.
And they told them things, and they learned things, and they were, the whole society was doing it.
Right.
It wasn't just some hippies or teenagers who are breaking the law. You know what I'm saying? It was like the whole society was doing these things, and they were probably learning things from intelligences which have a greater scope than we do. They're smarter than us.
Absolutely.
So to me, the fact that the ancient Egyptians built the Great Pyramid, which is like this mathematical monument, makes sense, because they could have been given that information from beings that know the speed of light and understand so much that we've only recently discovered as a culture.
Yeah.
But the problem is we have this physicalized notion of how everything has to be, and we just dismiss those who believed in animal-headed gods as pagan, like essentially a bunch of idiots. Really.
Right.
But I think that wasn't the case. That they were really tuned in a way that our culture is so far away from now that we have trouble even imagining it. You know.
I watched your recent interview with Robert Grant, where you and Jeff, when you did a 3-parter, I think, with him, and he's done quite a lot of good work, hasn't he, in Egypt, and discovered even more stuff, and particularly with Da Vinci's work and seeming to encode. And so this, I mean, he was a lawyer, but I think he went to anthropology or archaeology, a guy called Marescu, who's written a book, The Immortality Key, which has actually done the archaeology at Greece, where they've dug up the pottery and found that they were taking hallucinogens at the oracle at Delphi.
Like they got the residue from the
pots, from
the pots, and they're like, they analyzed it in a mass spectrometer, and they're like, oh yeah, this is hallucinogenic.
This is hallucinogenic. And so this connection then with what we're discussing now and geometry, the birthplace of civilization, and you talk about Plato and Archimedes, Euclid and so on, you know, this is what we're talking about. And it's exactly the same place where there was this relationship to another consciousness through these psychedelic plants, rather than it being a bunch of stoned hippies, as you say.
Yeah, and it's funny that it's almost like we're on that spiral and we've come around above it, and we're like, oh, we're like all this time has passed.
Right.
But I'm super interested in Plato and Pythagoras and these fundamental philosophers, and I'm taking a lot of wisdom from them,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that we haven't really gone much farther than that.
No, that's right.
And yeah, even all this time has passed, and we think we're so smart, and we are in some ways. We've definitely gone beyond the material culture of antiquity. But philosophically, I think we don't even really have a philosophy. It's kind of nihilism, really.
It is.
And it's really toxic.
It is toxic. I agree with you.
So I think in order to maintain a level of sanity, each person has to kind of make sense of, what does it mean to be alive? What does this mean? What am I to make of all of this?
Well, it comes back. Yeah, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, I'm sorry. That was just, I think that's the hero's journey that we all go on.
Yeah.
And I tried to write down notes from my little journey in my recent book, Sacred Geometry, Philosophy, and Worldview, because I think it will be helpful to other people who are at different stages of their journey to be reassured that somebody else has done it, and also to give you kind of a cognitive framework for how this is mapped out. And I don't know, is that valuable? You read the book. Is there? You've probably done all these things yourself. So, what use is it to you to read this?
Well, that's the wonderful, beautiful thing about language, isn't it? Is that somebody could just reorder some words and put them in a different way, and different light bulbs come on, you know. And so I'd never really said the most valuable thing. There's a bunch of stuff in the book, but one of the most valuable things that stuck in my mind after I first read it was the language is the map and not the territory. There were a couple. I have to say, Scott, there were a couple of occasions I read this in the garden, right? And it was summertime last year or whatever it was, and there were times, and it doesn't happen to me very often. I've read a lot of books. I had to put it down and go, okay, let me just think about that.
Yeah.
So for someone like me who's actually been exposed to this, I went to and I've done some workshops with Keith Critchlow, and I've been around Michael Glickman and Karen Alexander and all these people, John Martineau.
Those are like a lot of my heroes.
Right. John Martineau and I spent a week together in South Africa in 2014. And we stayed up every night drinking single malt whiskey and talking about all this stuff, right? Because the Harmony of the Spheres, his first little wooden book, my teacher held this up and said, okay, if you're going to get into the crop circles, this is where it's at. And I was like, wait, geometry, well, I don't know anything. And so I started from that and got so fortunate to become friends with John Neal and Robin Heath and Nick Colostrom and all these people, that were doing this stuff and get my head around it. And to have been exposed to all of that, Scott, and then to pick up your book and have to put it down and go, whew, that tells me that must tell you that you've done a really good job.
Well, thank you so much. That's a huge compliment, because you're talking about my heroes that have inspired me, and then you're saying that I'm in the same.
You are, in my view, you are
room with them.
Absolutely,
You know?
no question, no question, Scott. I mean, for anybody that hasn't watched Secrets in Plain Sight, you know that alone, that you did all those years ago, 14 years ago now, that it's a great piece of work, and the fact that you did it on iMovie and you rated it yourself, and you must have been driven by something, you know.
Well, I was inspired, and I had this psychic reading that the woman told me that I was going to be making a movie, and I'm like, oh really? That's news to me. And so what will it be about? You know, and she says, I can't tell you that, but your guides here. It was like she was talking to a room full of guides, and they're like, they all agree you're going to make this movie. It's going to be important for you to do this, and we can't tell you what it is. You have to figure that out. And so I actually took that seriously. That was the catalyst for me to go on this soul searching, like, what am I going to write about? And then the whole script for this like almost 4 hour movie came out in about a week.
Wow.
Like I wrote the whole thing down, and then I edited it. Editing it takes a while.
Yeah.
And then it took me a whole year of like getting the pictures and
doing the little animations with the measurements and so on.
And I didn't know how to make a movie, so I used iMovie on my old laptop. I think it was a 17-inch MacBook Pro I had in those days. And I made it. That's what I had, right? So I had to make a lot of short 15-minute segments in iMovie and then put them together in QuickTime Pro to make the thing.
It worked.
And it worked.
You've done.
I was just following my muse, you know, following that inspiration, and that's happened many times. I write different books, and I get the kind of the download or the inspiration for it suddenly, and then I love that period of just being like really active and like creatively and writing all this stuff, and it happens surprisingly quickly.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
and then all the rest of it is kind of plodding, like, oh, now I've got to market it, and I've got to like. Pick a cover design. I've got to do all these things I don't want to do, but to manifest it. And then it's out there, and like, 27 people buy it. And I'm like, yay.
Now 10 million views. Did it have 10 million or something, wasn't it, the last count?
Yeah, there were like 10 million views on another channel. The problem I had was everyone was reposting it.
Right.
And then a lot of them would put like a trailer on the front of it that said like Lucifer, this is like a Christian thing, or they would say this is like a conspiracy website thing, and everybody had their own spin on it. It was fascinating that it was embraced by so many different people.
Yeah.
With very different worldviews.
But that's the crop circles too. Over my years of experience with the crop circles, so many different groups of worldviews have turned up to claim that the crop circles is validating their particular worldview, whether they're UFO followers or whether they're from the Mayan tradition or Hindu or whatever, I'm
a little uncomfortable with that because...
Me too.
Because it ends up being like what I would call like all the crazies come out of the woodwork and glom on to something that isn't like sanctioned by Neil deGrasse Tyson,
right?
Or some kind of spokesman for the dominant worldview.
Yes.
And they're like, and then I get people who are like flat earthers.
Yeah.
And they're like, but they denounce me for being a round earth truther. And I have to laugh. Okay. All right. I do believe the world is round, oblate spheroid. I didn't know that was a belief, but I guess everything is a belief in the end.
Well, I mean, that's where another thing where geometry comes in and says, Euclid's second theorem isn't a belief, is it? It's an ever truth, as Plato put it. It's always been true. It's true now, and it's going to be true forever.
Well, it's like, oh, you can like, well, how does SpaceX, send a rocket up that orbits?
Yeah.
And you can see the video, the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, it's fake. It's CGI, I suppose. They've got an answer for everything, haven't they? And that's the thing about where we're at now with a post-truth world, some people call it. Where these arguments just sort of go like one of those flow charts where it goes A and B, and both of those destinations for the assertion have gone nowhere. They're just pushed to one explanation or another.
I saw a YouTube video recently with Andy Samberg, who's a comedian, really funny. And there's a picture of him, like, I can't remember, it was doing something slightly inappropriate. And he's all, oh, that was AI. It was great. Like, just denounce it. That was AI, that was not true. And which is, I mean, theoretically, you can make an image of anything.
Anything. I've seen, somebody showed me some AI today, just computer generated. And it was it was a man walking out on stage. And he had one screen of him actually doing what he was doing, and the screen above was the Joker from Batman, and they somehow just turned him into this thing. We've been messing around with 11 Labs and doing voice stuff. I don't know if you saw that Karen's essay, the call. I turned it into an audio essay narrated by Morgan Freeman.
Wow. Cool.
Go on my website.
I haven't seen it. Yeah,
it's an audio thing. If you go on my website, againstthegrain.site, Karen's it's a written version. It's there as well for those that want to go the traditional route. But I jazzed it up by putting some music in and turned it in with Morgan Freeman. It sounds brilliant. It's just, and that was taken from a 60-second sample of Morgan Freeman's voice, and then somebody doing an impersonation.
Amazing. I've played around with that with I think it's called Natural Reader Commercial. I have a license, and I uploaded a 3-minute video of me talking. And then I can get it to sound just like me whenever I need to,
You just put text in.
It's convenient for like when I'm making instructional videos and I fumbled over a sentence, I can just have it make that sentence for me. And I can put it in. But I haven't thought of putting Morgan Freeman to like narrate my...
I did one with, I wrote an essay about cognitive dissonance, about one of the crop circles that appeared last year with several that appeared with no centers, the circles. And I wrote an essay about that. And then I turned it into an audio essay with Matthew McConaughey. It's just, and it's this website.
What are these artists? Are they going to be mad that you're doing that?
Well, if you do it from an impersonator, if you've got somebody impersonating the voice, and then you've got a sample, it's not breaking any rules. If you just do it from a sample of their voice, you do need to have their permission. But if you've got someone that can impersonate them fairly well, then the AI will just clean it up, and because it's got this reference to be able to copy it. So that any legal recourse is sort of negated by those facts. So everybody's being copied. I mean, Joe Rogan's been saying recently he keeps getting sent all these adverts from his friends, like for Viagra, and he's saying, "I never did that," and it's in his voice,
Oh, yeah. I play with a Stable Diffusion, which is a text-to-image generator that you can run on your computer. Mm-hmm. And what's cool is you can make up people by saying, "I want 25% Scarlett Johansson, and I want 50% Anna de Armas, and I want, and you just specify what you want, and it makes up a unique human being who isn't any of those people, but has some of their qualities. And the reason that you would use celebrities is because there's a lot of photos of them,
right,
that it knows,
right,
and so you can mix them, you can kind of remix unique people that never have existed based on blending people together.
Yeah.
And then you, I wrote an essay about this, about AI and the collective consciousness.
Right.
And it's about, I think that this kind of new ability to create imagery, and also LLMs are tapping into the collective consciousness in a harmonic way. It's all of our pre-recorded material that we have had as humanity has been scraped for this. And so it's fascinating to be able to interact with that collective consciousness and pull out of it whatever you want. And you have to be skilled in how you prompt it.
Yeah, it's the problem.
And
Yeah.
getting what you actually do want. But it's like this magical box or something that you can just tell it what you want and it will just make that for you. And it's crazy, like amazingly powerful. Like it can make an image of a historical person in their study with all of the period accurate clothing and furniture, and everything in there is like, it looks so real in like less than a minute. And with Photoshop, that would take me like days
Yeah.
to make something like that good.
Yeah.
I don't think I really even could do it.
No.
It would be quite a difficult challenge. You'd probably be better off making a studio and bringing the furniture in and taking a picture of it, you know, with an actor, and it would be really expensive. But like, you can do this over and over again.
I've played around with Midjourney and Leonardo AI, and you know, like I want a 1957 Chevy, and I want it to be taken on a Canon so and so camera, and I want the ISO to be this, and I want it to be in a street in Cuba, and
It gets it.
knocks out 4 of them, and you choose that one and say, I just want to change that, and can we just change the lighting in that? And then within 4 iterations, you've got exactly what you want. Why would you hire a graphic artist anymore after stuff like that, or a photographer?
Exactly. I was just recording this course on Autodesk Dynamo, which is a visual programming system it's used in Autodesk Revit, architectural software. And within that visual programming system, there's an ability to connect to a Python node. So you can put actual code in there if you want.
Right.
And so I used ChatGPT, and I said, pretend that you're a Python programmer, and I told it what I'm using, and this is what I want. I want a catenary curve with inputs that control the curvature and the height and so on, and then it makes me some code, and then I put it in, and it has an error. Then I tell it what the error is, and then it revises the code, and then it works. And I'm like, wow, I'm not even a Python programmer. And yet, within a minute, I'm able to get code that works for what I imagined. I mean,
it's like even CRISPR, isn't it? You know, people who they don't have to be a genetic scientist anymore to be able to create a genetic sequence with CRISPR using ChatGPT, and it's taken us down a funny road, isn't it? This, you know, we really don't know what the next 5 or 6 years are going to look like with all of this, do we?
No, we don't. And people are going to try to break it and misuse it as much as possible. But people will also try to use it in a magnificent, creative way as best they can. And so you're going to have both of those things happening at the same time. People are going to be trying to like really like mess it up and make a bomb or do something terrible. So anything, it's like that Oppenheimer moment where they're kind of like, well, the bomb might consume the atmosphere. You know, should we detonate it? Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's try it. And that's what's going to happen with AI. There's too much money and momentum and corporations behind it. No one's going to say like, oh, maybe we shouldn't. There are people saying that, but it doesn't matter.
It's like they are, but it doesn't matter. It's become that race to the bottom, isn't it? I think Ginsberg. What did Ginsberg call it? The Moloch. Allen Ginsberg. It's this monster that once you've started down this road, it's the race to the bottom, and it can't stop, because even, if sort of an AI Cold War between China and the US, let's say.
Yeah, they do.
One's
The
not going to stop because
justification
the other
is
one,
they're going to do it. So what are we going to?
they're going to do it. So.
Yeah, what are we going to do? Just get taken over? Yeah, we're going to do it too.
Exactly.
And so it's already too late. Like definitely, it's going to happen.
So
yeah. And then what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Like, what does the future hold? My son is in university, his first year, and it's like, what should he study? Maybe some kind of computer programming, but then who knows if that language will be English? Just saying what you want.
If you got ChatGPT already writing code.
Well, I think you also need to learn the code, because it'll have an error, and then you have to figure out what it is, and you have to fix it. And so there's going to be, but it's going to be at a different level. It'll be more like a director of a movie who is directing the actions of all of these actors.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Rather than being the individual actor who's just doing the thing, you're actually at a higher level of organization, and you're like, okay, I need this program that does these things, and then I'm gonna have GPT write it for me, but I'm gonna have to debug it, and I'm gonna have to make it efficient, and I'm gonna have to think of these other things. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still a work of human creativity.
Yes.
But it's leveraged by this power of AI, and you're harnessing more power. It's like you have a team of programmers working for you, maybe. It's like that sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, a bunch
maybe it just saves
I like to
you
think
time.
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe it just saves you
it's like
a
a
bunch of
personal
time.
assistant, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But and if you don't do that, you're out of work. Because other people will.
And so amidst all of that, we've been talking about getting a compass and a straight edge and a pencil out and going back to sort of,
it's quite an anachronism.
in order to understand ourselves.
I think it's like black and white photography also. Like, it still exists. People still do that with film. They do go out there and take black and white photos because it's really cool and it's really amazing, and you can get beautiful art out of it. But of course, it's not the cutting edge of culture anymore. Like, we have color digital cameras that can do that, Photoshop, and we have AI that can make the picture faster than you can even put the film in your camera.
Yeah.
But there's something beautiful about these old ways of doing things that involve us more as human beings. And I think there's kind of a sweet spot for us as human beings. Like we were talking earlier about Arjuna and stuff like that, about being in the body, being embodied, and finding a medium that works with our limbs, with our body, with our, and I think that like the traditional instruments are a great way to do that in terms of understanding geometry. There's probably another way is doing, like I've done this with Jeff in Ireland, where we do a large scale sand mandala. Like a whole group of people have these traditional Tibetan chalk pour tools, and you slowly like pour this colored sand out in the geometry, and you decorate it with stones and seashells and pine cones and things like that. And there's something magnificent about that. It's almost like a game of Twister, where you have to step over someone who's doing their work in one area and you're doing your work next to them, and you become part of this larger organism that is making this whole this thing together. And that one feels really like a tribe coming together, and that's a magnificent experience that can only be done in person. That I want to do more of that with Jeff.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I've heard Jeff talk about that, and I think I'd like to take part in something like that, because there's this. I've seen the monks doing these mandalas. It's incredible stuff. So
and then you sweep it away at the end.
Well, that's why I love Karen's. I always think of Karen's Temporary Temples title with that, because that's crop circles. Yeah? They get swept away at the end of the season. We don't get attached to them. as being these, you know.
I think it's a lesson, it's a microcosm of your entire lifespan, because eventually everything is swept away.
Exactly.
And you're gone.
Yeah.
So we have to come to grips with that. And it's very emotional, I think, of sweeping that thing away and saying, okay, we've made something beautiful, but we have to let go of it.
But in today's world, we talk about the quantity of years that the person spent on Earth, rather than the quality so much. That the first thing we go to is the quantity. It's this slant towards.
He had 85 years of tedium and purposelessness.
Yeah, but he had a good innings.
Yeah.
So
like the.
Go on. You like that?
I like the replicant in Blade Runner, who said, or I think it was his creator who said, "The candle that burns twice as brightly burns half as long."
Yes.
And he had a like incredible brief life of 4 years, and he just wanted more, like anyone would.
Yeah.
But it was a magnificent. He had like incredible like capacities, and that would be a terrible. It is a tragedy, but it would be even worse if there was no reincarnation. If you believe that when you die, that's it, game over.
Yeah.
And I think, like, just psychologically, even if materialism is the truth, and there's no such thing as a soul, and all this woo-woo stuff is just a bunch of BS, I think psychologically you'd be better off believing in all those things, because you'll live a better life.
The opening,
more fulfilling.
The opening to Michael Schneider's The Beginning of the Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe has a foreword by John Michel. And I was going to grab it off the shelf and read this out, actually, and I forgot to pick it up from downstairs. But it's something like, to paraphrase John Michel, he says that there are people in the world that belief's not good enough, to believe that there is something other, to believe that there is this metaphysical. And for those of us that want to know, but need something that's going to give us some evidence, then geometry is the way. And it's the foreword to this book that opens up the whole notion of qualitative geometry and secular mathematics and sacred mathematics in Schneider's book. And that's why I think that what the crop circles represent, what geometry represents, what you're doing, bringing sacred geometry to people, gives people this other way from belief, just blind belief in religion, where certainty makes people fight with each other, where mystery, the certainty of things going together in the way they do with geometry, but then also giving you this view down the road to a never-ending mystery, a journey that you're on with it. It will stop people fighting. It has the potential to stop people fighting over whose imaginary friend is the best one.
Yeah, and it's universally true, the geometry.
Yes.
And that's very reassuring in a time of post-truth. Like, why don't you reconnect with something that is demonstrably true?
Right.
It's this geometry that you've drawn. Like, the next person can draw it, and it will be the same.
The same. And so, amidst all of this world we're diving into now with AI and all of the things it can do for us, what you're doing, encouraging people to get the compasses and the straight edges out and actually be grounded in geometry. And indeed, what the crop circles, I think, are underlying the message behind them is getting put through. Think about this to keep your feet on the ground. And I like that notion. I think it's potentially, in my view, a thing that could keep our sanity amidst all of this chaos that's around us.
Yeah, I agree. I would listen to a clip of Elon Musk, who is saying to some small group, he was saying, we're really going to have to focus on giving people meaning in life, because he's anticipating these robots taking over everyone's jobs, and then having to have basic income, and then people not having any meaning from their employment because they don't have a job. Then we're kind of left adrift of like, what are we here for? And I was thinking sacred geometry is a wonderful way to find meaning, to reconnect or to connect with deeper truths about the universe, about yourself, that is an inner path.
Right.
And it's also miraculously an outer
path.
as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what else than geometry is what's underlying the universe? It's geometry.
Right.
And it's also this wonderful vehicle for going inside.
Right.
And so this is how you can find meaning outside or inside. And everyone is different in how they want to, what they conclude or what their meaning is at the end of the day. But I think that this is a great path to put people on.
To bring me, because meaning is what it's all about, isn't it? That's what this, to bring it back to this, language is the map and consciousness is the territory. The consciousness is what applies the meaning, or what puts the meaning to the words, to the abstract sounds and so on. And so we it's like I've always said, we're wired for story, because story is full of meaning. And if we don't hear the end of a story, if we don't get the point given to us, or the meaning of the fable or whatever it is, we feel cheated. It's deep in us, isn't it? So meaning is so intrinsic to consciousness.
But I think that meaning is something that you have to bring your own meaning to the party.
Absolutely.
And I think it's part of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, of going on your own hero's journey and finding your own meaning. Like if I tell you the meaning, you're going to think I'm an idiot.
Yeah, of course.
Or you're going to reject it, and you're going to say, no, that's not the meaning. Not for me. So you have to find your own meaning in life. But you need a vehicle, a framework to help you, I don't know, travel?
Well, travel, yes.
it?
But what you just said, travel inside and outside at the same time. And sacred geometry, it's like, I don't know if you saw my presentation on Karen's temporary temples, on my research on martial arts and the internal martial arts and sacred geometry. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't seen it, no.
I'll send you a link to it if you want.
Yeah.
So that's where I've done the bulk of my work in terms of connecting the geometry with the internal stuff. And so there's an internal system called Bagua, and they walk the circle. It's a martial art where they imagine an imaginary axis, and they walk the circle. And one foot makes a square; it goes in straight, and the outer foot has a curve to it. So figuratively, you're squaring the circle, and you will make 8 steps to go around. So that's where the Bagua comes from, with the trigrams of heaven and earth and so on. And so
Wow.
it links out. And so it's so funny that when you start doing this stuff and experiencing it through the body, because you have to spiral the body and spiral the spine to change directions and change the way your feet work and all that, just walking around this imaginary circle and squaring the circle with your feet, you're starting to let go of your muscles and go into your tendons, and then the tendons into your ligaments, so that you're going internal physically. Okay. But at the same time, there's a correlation with somehow going inside yourself and going inside your soul, because there will be metaphors or analogies for you to make an introspective kind of examination of yourself. And in my own experience, as this geometry, the geometry that's connected to this, that I found outside in the outside world, I remember going to my teacher and talking about, where does the truth lie? Is it inside? Is it by diving in, or is it by going out? And he said, and I think this is true, I'm not sure, I still the journey, but he said it's at the point where they both meet, and you've got to discover where that is for yourself. And that's like discovering this meaning for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're projecting something out.
I think that an individual might be more interested in going out or going in. And either choice is fine, because we know that they end in the same place, in consciousness. So I'd say the outer path is the path of the scientist, and the inner path is the path of the mystic. But at the end of the roads, they conclude that consciousness is underlying everything. And so I think there's no directive to follow one path or the other. Or you can follow both. And it's your own choice. And I don't want to incur any karma by telling you what to do in any way. But I can just tell you like what I've done and what I've seen others do. And geometry is just a cool way of doing that seems universal, that is kind of baggage free, at the best, because it's just geometry and it's something that we
It's
can all
geometry.
agree on. And what else can we all agree on? Almost nothing.
Right.
So why don't we work from there and then see where we go, because we're all in that together. And I think that's the right attitude.
No, that's a really good way to finish, I think. It's something that can bring us all together and stop us fighting, and actually we can agree on it because it contains these inherent principles and truths. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much for joining me, Scott. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me. I think we should do this again. I'll have you
I
on
definitely
our
want to.
podcast, as well.
That would be great. Yeah, definitely want to do this again. Yeah, okay. That would be fantastic. Well, okay, so we'll end it here and definitely talk again. Thanks so much.